Hello, I'm Matt Kelly.
And I'm Matt Dancona.
And this is the two Matts for the week ending January the 5th.
The first podcast of 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a year it's going to be.
It is, isn't it? What did we talk about, Matt?
We talked about a variety of apocalyptic scenarios.
Yes.
Tried to inject a
the
little
apocalypse
bit,
can come in a number of ways.
A little bit of wit and fun and, hope into the otherwise despairing landscape. But I think we kind of concluded that if maybe the salient characteristic of the year ahead is going to be just the sort of the scope of the possible.
Yes.
It was the unthinkable.
Well, this was the theme, isn't it? That what a few years ago you would think was unthinkable has now become very thinkable. And
so
this
maybe that's the title.
We should call it that. So
2024.
This is the two Matts, episode 28, 2024, Thinking the Unthinkable.
Thinking the Unthinkable.
Enjoy. So, Matt, what are we going to talk about in this first show of 2024?
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And to all our listeners,
yes.
Happy New Year and welcome back. And it's going to be an incredible year, not necessarily in a good way either.
Yeah.
4 billion voters going to the polls, more than half the world's population, and a whole series of really important decisions and moments and conflicts going on in the year ahead, which I hope we'll be able to at least discuss some of today.
Yeah.
And I guess the big one will be the presidential election on November the 5th in America.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe we'd kick off with, just to get things started, a quick clip of Trump's latest intervention. If producer Ollie could give us a blast of that, that'd be wonderful.
I want to get right to NBC's Dasha Burns, who has posted up for us live from Iowa, of course, with those caucuses less than 2 weeks away. Talk to us about what we're just learning, this appeal to the Supreme Court. It is not unexpected. Yeah. The timing was a question mark, but here now in the 5 o'clock hour Eastern time, we have it. Talk us through it.
Well, so let's remind folks about that Colorado Supreme Court ruling, which was based on language in the Constitution and the 14th Amendment that prevents those who engage in an insurrection from running for various federal offices. And in that appeal to the Supreme Court, Trump's lawyers said that if the court were to allow it to stand, it would mark the first time in history of the United States that the judiciary has prevented voters from casting ballots for the leading major party presidential candidate. The court, the lawyer said, should return the right to vote for their candidate of choice to the voters.
That's a very technical way to kick off what is a huge, monumental, historic presidential contest. But it's not unapt because we're all going to have to become lawyers this year.
Yeah.
Because so much of the Trump controversy between assuming he does get through and stands, wins the Republican nomination and then goes on to face, one presumes, the incumbent Joe Biden in November, is going to hang on legal matters. And one thing I did not expect for late 2023, early 2024 was that I was going to have to find out more about the 14th Amendment.
Yes.
But we are, because Colorado Supreme Court and Maine Secretary of State have both invoked this amendment in order to try and keep Trump off the Republican primary ballot. Where does this come from? Well, the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 to keep the defeated Confederates after the Civil War off ballots, right?
Right.
Actually, the reporters there didn't quite get it right, which is if you've sworn an oath of office to the Constitution, you can, and you then engage in insurrection, you cannot then stand for office. In an effort to try and keep Trump out of the pit completely, they're invoking the 14th Amendment. Now, I'm a rule of law guy, so if the courts uphold this, then let's go with it. Yeah, but I was very interested. Bill Barr, who was one of the attorney generals under Trump and hates Trump, wrote a very good piece in the Free Press this week in which he said, look, actually the case for keeping Trump off the ballot on this basis is quite flimsy.
Right.
And one of the reasons for that is that the amendment sort of makes it unclear whether the authority lies with the states or with Congress, and it implies that there should be a criminal conviction of the office holder.
Of the offence before you can then...
And Trump, although we all know he was involved in an insurrection, has not yet been convicted of that felony. He may well be, but he was cleared by the second impeachment scandalously. my hunch is that it will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will knock it back.
And just looking forward beyond, so say, imagine that he is withheld from the ballot. I mean, it's in many ways that's even worse than him.
Yes,
running.
I mean, again, as I say, another stick in the mud. Say, well, if the courts say that, then we should go with it. But looking at it in a kind of pragmatic way, keeping the runaway favourite for all that we can't bear him, and I wonder if he'd like us. I went to the Two Med studio. There were two of them, both really good podcasters.
Great podcasters.
Very fine podcasters
Best,
on both sides.
Some say the best.
I could have done it better.
Yeah.
They were talking about something called Brexit. I didn't understand. Anyway, very nice guys.
Nice guys.
The
best guys.
The best guys.
Some
so anyway, we'll never find out. But you're right. If they keep this guy who is now 60% of the competition off the ballot, this is not necessarily a recipe.
Well, if they talk about stolen election on an election that he was actually able to run in,
yes.
Imagine what they'll say
when he wasn't,
if he's
right?
taken off.
I mean, it's the pressure upon. Although the judiciary should be free from social pressure, they won't be, and keeping him off the ballot will be problematic, to say the least.
Yeah.
However, that's just a sort of taste of what lies ahead, because between now and what will be a hugely consequential election with an unpopular and weakened Democrat incumbent, Joe Biden, we've got all these court dates coming up. So, for example, he's still claiming presidential immunity. We know that the federal case on his insurrection stuff, it being brought by the special prosecutor Jack Smith, is heading for trial on March the 5th. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because the day after March the 4th, the day after March the 5th is Super Tuesday,
right? On
which day 1/3 of all Republican delegates are selected. So, already you're in. There's this sort of collision between the primary process and Trump's big trial appearances,
the legal process,
and I think that one of the many weirdnesses about a very weird year is going to be that the trials are going to be the campaign. That's where the action's going to be, and of course this presents a problem for Biden, because he's going to want to run a routine do you really want to risk it, think how far we've come campaign against a guy who every time he's indicted seems to do better and get more funding.
And as you've said repeatedly, and you say in this week's New European column, Biden doesn't get the credit that you would expect him to get for the real progress that America's made under his presidency.
Tremendous progress. I mean, on a lot of measures, mostly economic, Biden's had a very successful presidency. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was not his or America's finest hour. But in terms of just getting the country back on its feet, he's done very well. But I think what you're seeing, and this is a warning to Starmer, who we'll probably come on to in a minute, is that the damage that the populist right does to trust has a terrible impact upon progressive parties, because Biden is not getting any credit for all this. And one of the reasons for that is because people don't see a link between what governments do and the improvement of their quality of life. And actually, America's ahead of us in this regard. Jobs coming back, people are starting to feel the impact of inflation falling. There is, in normal rules, which I think are over now and not coming back, Biden really ought to be steering towards a quite comfortable re-election, but he isn't. Right. So about this, one can make no certain predictions. This is going to be a very, very difficult, angry race. And we've said it before on the podcast that the only scarier thing than Trump winning is him losing. Because can you imagine? We're recording this on Thursday. Saturday is the 3rd anniversary of January the 6th. That was after an election he clearly lost. What will it be like if he loses again?
Right.
Supporters have been planning for 4 years. The militias are growing. One just hopes that there is an orderly transfer of power, whatever happens. But the reason it's good to start off with this is that America is still the most powerful nation on earth, and it could well be about to go through sort of 12 months of total introspection, which will have huge consequences for the other things we're probably going to be talking about in this podcast.
I mean, there's a massive question, which is democracy fit for purpose in the environment that we live in now? You said a moment ago the rules have changed completely
Yeah.
and the old rules are never coming back. So what's the long-term consequence?
I think that the long-term consequence is that a lot of the things that have been a matter of convention will have to become a matter of rule.
Yeah, nailed down.
Yes,
Yeah.
because, conducted debates,
Yes.
appropriate language to use. What we do about figures like Trump who've been disgraced. I mean, clearly, in a sane democracy or republic, as America always likes to describe itself, a character like Trump should not be able to stand for re-election, but he almost certainly is.
Yeah.
And I think that this is very difficult for Americans to understand and to come to terms with and make peace with, because they venerate the Constitution so much. And the whole basis of American politics is we've got the Constitution, the rules make it clear. And what's horribly apparent is that the Constitution as written is not enough to safeguard the Republic against an autocratic populist entertainer stroke fascist like Trump. And now, I mean, one thing I think we need to do and carry on doing and never not do again is start to work on the basis that when people say something, they mean it.
Yeah.
So before 2016, we very much with Trump, he's just a cartoon villain, he'll never do any of these things. So when he said to Hannity, Sean Hannity of Fox, in one of the Iowa town halls last month, I'd be a dictator on day one, everyone went, yeah, good old Trump. But then you think, actually, he means it. Yeah. I remember last year you read out that list of Umberto Eco's definition of fascism, right?
Yeah.
And, Trump,
tick,
tick, tick, tick, tick, tick, tick.
Yeah.
And a second term of Trump would be very, very difficult for the Republic to recover from, I think.
Yeah. So bringing it to these shores, then,
yes,
because that was the bulk of your piece this week, and when I read the phrase, I kind of went, yes. You said that the collapse in trust in British politics is analogous to the collapse of the economy in 2008.
Yeah.
There's been an
ethical crash.
There's been an ethical crash.
Yes.
And of course, you hear Keir Starmer talking very well.
He was talking this morning, Thursday in Bristol.
Yeah, very well
yeah.
about restoring trust in politics. Yeah. But talk is cheap, and any crash takes a long time to recover from. And you listed a number of points where
you could start. But it is a start.
Yeah.
And also, one thing I do think is it's an asymmetric thing, the decline of trust, because populist right-wingers like cynicism. They want people to blame their woes upon judges and elitists and the wokerati, whatever that means, and immigrants,
right,
and not expect government to make a difference to their lives, actually.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a progressive party, the whole basis is that, communal collective action works, collaboration works. And so one of the injustices of all this is that Labour, paradoxically, is going to be the one that picks up the bill, if you like, for Boris Johnson and bloody Liz Truss.
Blowing all the trust. And
Sunak with his ridiculous Rwanda policy.
Yeah.
And this the kind of burden on a prospective Starmer government is going to be crushing in that respect.
So what are the practicals? Because Chris Bryant has written about this, and you quote his book.
Well,
what are the practicalities?
I mean, clearly we now know, because Sunak has this morning, Thursday, announced in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire that he's working on the assumption there'll be an election in the second half of 2024, which presumably means October, November. I mean, it could go December, I don't know. But so Starmer now has a lot of real estate to fill.
Yeah.
And we know that he's not going to want to talk too much about the specifics of fiscal policy. So, one of the things he could talk, and this is the point of the column, I guess, which is, there are specifics, some of them quite granular, that you could do to improve kind of survey the regulation of public standards in this life. The Electoral Commission, the very complex tangle of bodies that oversee public life in Whitehall and Westminster could be consolidated, and so on. And these are things that won't cost any money.
It sounded a bit like the suggestion was, and this is a crude way of saying it, but like a sort of an overarching ethical police force.
With teeth.
Yeah,
with teeth.
Responsible to Parliament.
Yes, so but only responsible to Parliament on a statutory basis.
Yeah.
Not. I mean, the thing that MPs will bristle about is the idea that any body should sort of have authority over them who isn't a parliamentarian.
Yeah, but that's bullshit, though.
Well,
isn't it?
I'm afraid we've passed that point.
Tough luck.
Too bad.
Since the expenses scandal, they've proven they're as rotten as the rest of us. And we all need policing.
Here we are. I mean, that was 2009. We're now 2024. 15 years. Sorry, guys. So I think that could be a good theme, because I think that he's got a lot of time to fill now, Starmer. And we saw him this morning. There was some good lines in it, like "This is your year." I thought that was a nice line. But when he gets on to, well, we're going to fund everything from growth, it's quite alarming, because as we've discussed before, yes, but
that's going to take a long time, and it's hypothetical growth, isn't it? No one can pinpoint where that money and when that money's going to come in.
He says, "Oh, we're going to be a radical government because we're going to have the most sustained growth in the G7." Well, says who? How can you possibly know that? Yeah. The other thing is that there's a slight cart before the horse problem here, which is, realistically, to get growth going, we do need a Keynesian moment. We do need an injection of investment. But he says, I'm not going to get into big spending and taxes before we've got growth going. Well, good luck with that. I mean, you don't just get growth going by saying we're going to have, as every incoming government has since the 50s, a skills revolution.
Yeah.
And we need to improve productivity. Well, yeah.
But all of that is based back on, it's a manufactured conceit based on Brexit. Saying we need a skills revolution because we can't import the skills that we had before.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't bring in skills to make the economy work, so we're going to have to do it ourselves. But, there is a bigger solution, which is, okay, well, let's rethink immigration completely and bring in skills to get the economy moving.
The interesting thing on this is, the more I think about it, the more I think that question will be impossible. He may be able to get to the election without having done anything other than, well, we want a closer relationship too. But once he's in, assuming he does get into number 10, once he's in number 10, it will be screamingly apparent what you just said.
Yeah.
That, if we're not in the single market,
this is going to go on and
his
on
growth,
and on.
His growth objective is meaningless.
Yeah.
And so I think that will be one of the most important and difficult identity crises of the first year.
His challenge is to find a way of presenting that solution as not a correction to Brexit. He's got to find a way of presenting the solution of re-entering the single market, or whatever we call it, as not, we effed up at Brexit.
No, it can't be. It cannot be a relitigation of 2016, because if you do that, then the Dominic Cummingses, the Matthew Elliott,
then they've got
what they want, right?
Exactly.
So it's got to be. And I think, actually, to do him justice, I think that part of the reason that he's been sort of playing what you might call this gentle patriotism, which is certainly not nationalism, but it's a kind of, singing God Save the King at the Labour conference and so on, is that he sees that as a gateway. We're going to be a better country, and as a better country, we're going to be fit for a new relationship with the EU.
Right.
Rather than we're going to reverse a terrible mistake.
So it's a patriotic step to...
Yeah, and
it's not a loss of sovereignty.
Not in the slightest.
It's an assertion of sovereignty.
We are a confident country, and therefore we understand that countries that are confident in the modern world have to be interdependent, have to pool their sovereignty. We've been doing it forever, and we're going to take this first step, whether that's joining EFTA or the single market, I don't know. But that, I think, is the way to do it. But it's very difficult. Yeah. And we know, and we've discussed it before, the Daily Mail will go berserk, the Telegraphs will go berserk. It'll be against what we assume will be a more openly populist right Conservative Party will go berserk. So he's got to have real cojones on this. Yeah. I think the honest truth is we don't know. I mean, Look, the guy's in his quiet way played a blinder, hasn't he? He's taken the party from, the absolute depths of electoral despair to the edge of office. One has to hand it to him.
You've got to remember that it's only, what are we talking about, 3 years ago when people were talking about a decade
of Boris Johnson.
Yeah. And not because of Boris Johnson, but because of Jeremy Corbyn.
Right. And so if Starmer stood down tomorrow, he'd be one of the most important leaders in the history of the Labour Party. Right. So, he's done something right. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be a great prime minister, but jury's out. Yeah, that's the best I can do, really, on Starmer, because he is a sphinx when it comes to all this. And there are people quite close to him who will say, I don't know,
What did you make of that phrase, which has been widely praised this morning, about a government that treads more lightly on people's lives?
I think that's a very thinly coded sort of olive branch to blue wall Tories.
Right.
I mean, the truth is that if you look at the challenges of the next 50 years, actually government is going to have to be quite... It's going to have to intervene in our lives a lot.
The paradox of what he's saying is that there's a huge amount of work to be done to rebuild trust. There's huge... We've always... we can trot off the existential problems this country faces, and that is going to require a lot of government, not less.
Regulation of AI, climate change, which we can go on and talk about in the second half maybe. But, these are things that... Not to speak of the sort of glaring problem of inequality of a kind that is simply not sustainable.
Yeah.
But also, if you want social cohesion to continue, the level of difference between the very rich and the very poor in this country is just not
Do you know
sustainable.
What we should do, mate? And I'm saying this because I was about to say what they need to do, but we should do it as well. We should take this on the road, this podcast, and go to 5 or 6 different towns.
I totally agree.
And maybe somewhere in the countryside as well, and do it with people. And try, I've mentioned John Harris before about
he's
I just
excellent.
think it's proper real journalism where you go out and you actually see stuff.
What would make a difference? What would
and
help?
Talk to people and try and get a real sense of what's going on in the country.
I think the biggest change in my lifetime has been that even under Thatcher, there was a notion amongst enough voters that they would get a fair shake. And now, especially amongst young people, but obviously all over, outside the Golden Triangle of the Southeast, lots of people who just have absolutely no confidence that they're going to get a fair shake.
Yeah,
they have to work 60-hour weeks, turning 2 jobs, and they still need universal credit.
Yeah.
Now that is not a sustainable basis for the 7th richest country in the world to work. These are questions of a kind of profundity and ideological difficulty that Starmer does not want really to get into, but he or someone else is going to have to. All
right. Well, if you're listening and you would like us to come and visit your community and do the podcast from a village hall or a small theatre or something like this, or a school,
we'd love it.
We'd love it. So email in your suggestions to 2Matts, that's the number 2, MATTS, at tnepublishing.com. And we'd love to hear from you.
On the road again.
On the road again. That would
just
be great.
To get back on the road again. We're already murdering tracks in 2024.
Yeah. Right, we're going to take a short break before Matt starts singing any further, and we'll come back in a minute.
In the interest of public safety.
We'll come back with more chat about what we think might be big stuff in 2024. Thank you for listening to the 2Matts, and if you like the kind of conversations we have here, there are loads more to be had in print and online at the New European. And I have got a very special offer for all listeners of the 2Matts. We are giving away copies of Alistair Campbell's Diaries 2023, which is a book we're publishing this month. It's a fantastic diary full of everything that's happened, all the people he's met, and anybody who's a fan of Alistair Campbell's diaries over the years know how brilliantly he turns them out. He is very much a latter-day Samuel Pepys.
He really is.
He is. So you can get a free copy of Alistair Campbell's Diaries 2023 worth £20 when you subscribe to the New European from as little as £1 a week. Or if you like getting the newspaper delivered to your door every single week, you can have that for just another £1 a week. And that's a 75% saving on the price you'll pay at the newsagents. To get this great offer, go to www.theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts. That's the number 2, MATTS. Tell them I sent you, and you'll get your free copy of Alistair Campbell's Diary 2023 delivered to you in time for Christmas. So welcome back. 2024, my feeling. So one of my things, I think, the climate crisis is going to become more and more obvious.
Yeah.
Not just this year, but obviously on an ongoing basis. Yeah. And I was reading it in the New European. Nigel Warburton, our in-house philosopher, did a brilliant piece about how it's baked into us to assume that the future will be like the past. And this is really a problem when you get material change coming around the corner, which is what's happening. And then in the following pages in our carousel section, one story from Barcelona where there has been a drought for 2 years, basically, and none of those great city fountains in Barcelona have been running for 2 years. And since June, all the citizens have been restricted to 200 litres of water a day, which is basically a small bath, you know, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And then the next story, the Danube breaking its banks and flooding much of Hungary, you know, and people sitting there deluged in unseasonably warm and wet weather. And it definitely seems to be something that we've got our head in the sand about still, you know, despite all the verbiage and the talk and the mantras and the marches and all of this stuff. These are real changes that are happening to Europe, you know.
Oh, massive. And we talked a lot in 2023 about border control and migration and the horrors of the Rwanda policy and the incompetence of the Conservatives and their awful language. Well, I mean, climate change means that population mobility in the next couple of decades is going to be on a scale never seen before in the world.
And Paul Mason makes this point as well.
Very well.
About, you know, well, the analogy he uses was the development of the nuclear bomb and, you know, the fear of chain reactions of atomic warfare and stuff like this. But now a real threat of chain reactions of crises, localized crises, but all netting together. Some wars, some climate change disasters, populations on the move, political disruption, the disproportionate growth of other nations, you know, and how that affects the balance of the global economy. And we could be going into a period of, you know, I don't want to sound too much like Cormac McCarthy and The Road, you know, but we could be going into a period of real apocalyptic change, you know.
And it's very important as we're looking at 2024, and rightly so, because it's a very important year. But if you stop looking at the long term, none of the decisions and things that happen this year will mean a row of beans. And in fact, the issue you're talking about, Matt, is in many respects the only one that matters, because everything else is subordinate to that. And I do worry. I mean, I was appalled as you were by Sunak backsliding on the net zero strategy the government has, but I worry also that Labour, under political pressure, will keep pushing back its £28 billion pledge on green investment. And you have to have the courage of your convictions on this if you want there to be a planet for your children and grandchildren to have.
I'm still the phrase that my friend, the editor of Clarín in Argentina, wrote about the election of Milei, where Ricardo Kirschbaum, and he summed it up by saying that the fear of the present was greater than the fear of the future. And that is very true for all of us. You know,
it is.
As a species, we are very good at turning away from big things that are down the road to concentrate on smaller things in the here and now. And I just wonder, how do we, you know, apart from these climate conferences and all of this business, they're talking shops. We all know they're talking shops, but there's something palliative about the fact that everyone's agreed to keep it down to 1.5 degrees rise. It's bullshit, isn't it?
I think you need. I mean, there is no alternative to political leadership. You need political leaders to say what we've been saying, but better. You know, and put it in Lincoln, Churchill, JFK kind of language. And this is one of the things that has changed, which is that back in the day, leaders were not afraid of challenging electorates. There's much more followership now than leadership.
That's right.
And there are very few people one can point to, I think, in the global landscape who have that capacity to say this is going to be incredibly hard. And yes, you know, it's going to cost you money. And yes, it's going to be inconvenient. And yes, you're going to have to ditch your car. And last year was a bad year because you know, ULEZ is not about the ultra low emission zone scheme in London, is not about climate change, it's about air quality.
Pollution,
But, you know, the Uxbridge by-election caused a kind of nervous breakdown in the Labour Party. You know, oh my God, you know, if we do this, then we might lose the election. No, you know, you cannot think like that. And
again, it's a different issue, but it illustrates the point, the row in how hot under the collar people in Wales got about the idea of going 20 miles an hour rather than 30 miles an hour. Now, I drive in London, and when that change happened, for about 2 months you did think, God, this is achingly slow. But now if you drive at 30, it feels like ridiculously fast. And then you think about, you know, the hundreds of people who are still alive today because they weren't killed in a 30 mile an hour car crash. and the inconvenience, the 2 minutes extra it takes you on your journey to go at 20. All of those things make perfect sense, and no rational person really, when you sat down and said, in the great scheme of things, is this something that we are not going to do because we're so stuck on this 30-mile-an-hour nonsense? I think most people would say no, there are bigger things to worry about.
Absolutely. And actually, one of the things that we've become terrible at in the West, in free societies, is thinking long term.
Yeah.
We just are terrible at it. And there's that, the so-called effective altruism school that was rather besmirched by its association with Sam Bankes-Friedman.
Yeah.
And it's slightly quiet at the moment. But, they have a point about being good ancestors.
Yeah.
And treating people in the future as you would your neighbours.
Yeah.
But this is a way of thinking that is not commonplace. I mean, we think entirely in terms of convenience.
Maybe
really.
This is something that Starmer could think about when he's talking about the lighter touch of government. But is there something on a more grassroots level where he could structuralise community change, where pressure grew from the community?
I think so. And I mean, one of the things that I've heard sort of suggested at a very sort of MP level rather than minister level around Westminster a few times is that bring back national service, pause, gulp, everyone goes, no. But make the national service a year of helping with sustainability projects around the UK.
Like a kind of VSO kind of thing.
And the payoff would be that you get a bit of a help with your student debt or apprenticeship money and so on. You'd be paid a living wage while you were doing it. But it would actually bring people together at an early age into the idea that the big challenge facing the country is, just as national service used to be, it was national security, it was learning the basics of being a soldier. The future requires every citizen to be green.
Yeah, and engaged in the problem.
Engaged, and actually, and it would be something that I think a lot of people would enjoy, but also it's the kind of thing that we just don't do anymore, which is mobilise national and indeed and international opinion around a single idea.
A sense of mission. We've talked about this time again.
We're so marketised. Everything is even public services are now presented in terms of consumption. I mean, of course you emphasise waiting lists, of course, but waiting lists should be an aspect of your experience as a patient, not as a consumer.
That's right, yeah.
I hate that idea that I'm a consumer of public services. Of course I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a user of them, and through the tax system.
You're certainly a funder of them.
A funder of them, that's fine. But they're not fungible goods on the marketplace, or at least they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And the internet has spoilt us because, if our delivery of a book from Amazon is a day late, we act like it's a massive national crisis.
Yeah, I'm the worst of it. Honestly, it's now my reflex to order on Amazon Prime.
I know, of course.
Even if it's for sale down the road.
Right, but you're sitting there with your phone and you think, shit, I need this tonight. And,
I wanted to buy a dartboard. I was watching Luke Little.
Of course, I bet a lot of dartboards were sold on Amazon. That would be a great data point, I bet you.
They're hard to... You go and look,
now,
you can't get them.
There are Amazon vans all over...
Shuffling dartboards all over the country.
For the people's Oompa Loompa. I mean, God bless him. So thinking, the oldest looking 16-year-old in the world.
By the way, it must credit James O'Brien for the most apposite comment on that, which was that he tweeted, if this lad was an illegal immigrant, then the Daily Mail would be demanding his teeth were being carbon dated right now. And they would.
That's brilliant.
But they spent all year saying they're not teenagers.
These
Look
are
at them.
young men that come here to play darts.
Exactly. It was a great point, well made.
That is very, very good.
Yeah.
So that's climate change. Meanwhile, back on the war front. We go to Ukraine. Remember Ukraine?
Well, we're going to do a cover on it next week, I think.
Very good, because I mean, it's there was a very sad and testy interview with Zelensky in the New Year Economist, in which he said maybe not everything is as fast as someone imagined. That was the translation. You go back to 2022 when the invasion happened, and everyone was running around in blue and yellow, and Zelensky and this is an illustration of what we were just talking about, the sort of attention deficit thing, which is it's less than 2 years ago. It's not been that long,
and it's still going on worse than ever,
and worse than ever. And hey, that's what wars are like.
Yeah,
this is the problem: is that we're so geared to instant gratification that everyone came together, the West and free world, not the non-aligned South, but certainly the West and free world came together around Ukraine as more unified than at any point since 9/11. And everyone was, we help Zelensky. We're not going to put boots on the ground, but everything short of, we'll give him. And now, since October the 7th, and everyone focusing, understandably, upon the Middle East, we appear not to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time as an international community, because it's like, Ukraine, Schmukraine, he can do a deal. And yet again,
it's suddenly become grudging, hasn't it?
Very.
Like,
and
here's your money, but this is the last of it,
And I remember very early in the crisis saying, and I don't always get it right, but this one I did, which was, we're going to sell them out, because we sold them out in 1994, when in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear missiles, we said, yep, Budapest memorandum, any problems with your borders, you give us your nukes, any problems with the borders, we, Britain, America, will come to your aid.
Yeah.
We didn't give them NATO membership in the early 2000s. When Putin annexed Crimea in 2014, we went, sorry, it's tricky. We didn't give them a path to NATO membership at the Vilnius summit in July last year. In the end, we always sell Ukraine out. And I get the arguments for a compromise, and it's not realistic to drive Putin out to pre-2014 borders. But we acted like it was for the first 18 months.
That's
and
right.
you can understand why Zelensky is,
what happened?
What happened,
Where have you gone?
And of course, Putin is sitting there, running out the clock, hoping that Trump will win in November.
Yeah, well, this is the interwoven network of crises that
it
Paul's
really is. And I suppose that brings us on to the Middle East. And it's interesting in the last few days, because before Christmas we were very much talking about the crisis of October the 7th, and then the crisis of humanitarian disaster in Gaza with, what civilian casualties now up to 23,000, I think, and very much focused on that. And would it escalate? And it is escalating. There's just no question.
But it seems to me, so here's my naive take on it. I can't see what Netanyahu's strategy is other than wanting to drive Gaza completely free of Palestinians. Doesn't he want them to pour over the border into Egypt? Doesn't he want them on boats to come to Western Europe?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that he has two contradictory tasks. One is to eliminate Hamas or degrade its capabilities,
which everyone agrees is the right thing to do.
You can't eliminate it, but you can probably bring it down to the point where it's not a viable force.
Yeah.
But he also has more than 100 hostages still in Gaza. And he also knows that the minute the first phase of the military operations ends, he's toast anyway. I mean, the Supreme Court just, struck down his very dodgy judicial reforms. So he's a kind of lame duck prime minister, and he's not covered himself with glory during this crisis, to say the least. But I mean, meanwhile, you see all sorts of things going on. So there was that, we're recording this on Thursday. Yesterday, there was a explosion in Iran near the burial site of General Qasem Soleimani, who's a very iconic head of the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, and it was the 4th anniversary. At least 84 people killed.
4th anniversary of his assassination by the United States,
by the US strike in Iraq, and almost 300 injured. Terrible event. And no one knows yet who it was, but Iran's president, Ebrahim Raisy's already blamed Israel, blaming the, quote, Zionist regime. And America and Israeli sources in the Wall Street Journal today are saying, we have no evidence it was Israel, but you can see that in Iranian public opinion, it will already be baked in that it was. Meanwhile, in the Red Sea, Houthi rebels are firing on American and other ships, naval ships, and that's causing problems. In the north of Israel, you already have troops being withdrawn from Gaza and moved up to the Lebanese border to fight with Hezbollah. So people say, will it escalate? It is escalating into a regional crisis. And I think this is very worrying, because you already have to your point, Matt, you already have will there be anything left of Gaza at the end of it? You have very sore and isolationist Israel thinking no one cares about October the 7th. You have Iran on manoeuvres through its proxies, and America about to go in on itself. This is not a very happy combination of factors.
No, it's a shitstorm.
It is a shitstorm, and I find it very hard to game out a good answer. I mean, obviously we all want a two-state solution. I mean, anyone decent and sane wants that.
Yeah.
But,
well, except there's plenty of people who present themselves as decent and sane who say, no, that's not on anymore.
No, and I mean, I think Hamas is much more canny strategically than it's sometimes given credit for, because I think that it understood completely that it doesn't want a two-state solution, and it understood that Israel would go berserk after the October the 7th attack, and it has. Mm-hmm. And so the prospect of a two-state solution is now worse than it's been for 30, 40 years, which is very bleak.
Isn't the... I mean, I'm very reluctant to say the obvious thing, because I don't think there's anything obvious about any of this, but isn't the closest to an obvious first step a ceasefire now?
Well, I mean, look, there's the endless row over nomenclature, right? Humanitarian pause, truces and all that.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want a humanitarian pause, right? You want to see fewer people die.
Yeah.
The problem is that where I part company with the sort of ceasefire party is when they think that a ceasefire is going to resolve everything and lead immediately to talks in Oslo or Geneva about how to divide up the area of Israel and the territories. And I think that that's naive, which is, of course, you want to see the scale of civilian casualties fall down, ideally to nil. But I don't agree with the argument that a ceasefire, welcome it was it be in a kind of humanitarian way, will lead automatically to lots of things. So yes, a ceasefire, but what then?
Yeah.
What? Because clearly Hamas cannot be part of the next. The only reason to lobby for a ceasefire is because you believe that there are negotiations to be had,
or you believe that Hamas is already so eroded that
yes,
there's now a void of sorts.
That
needs filling by something.
I hope that's so.
Yeah.
And when that's so, then absolutely. But all I would say is that who can be against a ceasefire? I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say, but what I do worry is that ceasefire has become a proxy word for just stop and leave the job half done.
Right.
I mean, personally, what I'd like to see is Netanyahu go.
Yeah.
Replaced by someone like Benny Gantz, who's got military credentials but is sane.
Yes.
And I think unlike Netanyahu, would have a kind of 3 to 4 year plan.
Well, Netanyahu hasn't got a 2 to 3 week plan.
Exactly.
I mean, he's hiding from people like Benny Gantz because they're all saying, "Well, what is the end of state?
What's the end game?
Where do you want us to get to?
Where do you want us to get to?"
And he's literally not taking the meetings.
Yeah, and hostages' families are being very critical of him, and understandably, which is like, well, how are you getting our people out?
Yeah.
So I think it is, certainly until he goes. I mean, what you really want is Hamas out and Netanyahu out. I mean, that is a result.
That would be progress. Yeah.
That would be progress of a sort. But what I fear is that this is now escalating into a regional conflict and perhaps a international conflict, because you read worrying stories about arrests of jihadi cells all over Europe and in America, and it is not hard to see this sort of translating into atrocities which will then be even more divisive.
Totally.
So that worries me enormously for the year ahead.
It's clearly absolutely depressingly tragic.
It is tragic
without obvious solution.
Sometimes, and this is very hard for people of a liberal mindset to accept. I find it hard to accept. There are things which are just tragic. It's very difficult, and that's not a reason to give up.
Yeah, no, totally. And you can always minimise tragedy, but it still doesn't stop it being a tragedy.
No, absolutely. And then speaking of apocalypse, there's a presidential.
Are we switching up?
There's a presidential election in Taiwan on January the 13th.
Brilliant.
Hooray! Yeah. And look, I mean, up until now, this year probably, I've always thought, look, China isn't going to blockade Taiwan. Come on. And America has always been able to have this kind of totally inconsistent policy, which is we believe in one China, but if China ever blockades or invades Taiwan, we will respond militarily. It doesn't make any sense at all, but it's kind of worked. Everyone's saved face. And now suddenly Beijing's trying to oust the ruling DPP party, because who they feel are getting a bit too independent, and the incumbent president Tsai Ing-wen has come to the end of a maximum 2 terms, so it's in play. And what's scary is the level of cyber intervention and other forms of intervention by Beijing in this election. It's very tight and no one knows what it's going to lead to. But again, what you have to worry about is, imagine a more biddable regime coming in Taiwan, more Beijing friendly. And then imagine a crisis of some sort in America.
Right.
Where if you were Xi Jinping, you'd think, is it ever going to get better?
Yeah. Let's just take the moment.
Let's just take the moment. Now,
as Putin did with Ukraine.
Exactly. Now, the one of the slogans in Taiwan at the moment is, we don't want to be the second Ukraine or the next Ukraine. And you can understand why. And I think that's sort of one of the characteristics of this year, 2024, is that the unthinkable is becoming thinkable, and the levels of volatility are unprecedented. I just don't know. I mean, one hopes the Taiwanese election will go off smoothly. One hopes that when we're having this conversation this time next year, Taiwan will still be in this strange limbo, constitutional limbo it is. But I can't say with any certainty that's the case. And that is
the theme throughout this entire conversation we've just been having, is that the unthinkable is becoming thinkable.
Yes,
across everything.
And I think a lot of bills are finally coming due to be paid. And one of them is, what sort of international order do we want? What kind of UN do we want? But also, what do we want America to do? Because when Biden was elected, he said America is back, and everyone went, "Ray!" An end to Trump isolationism. But we've shown repeatedly that we don't really want America to be rampaging across the landscape, fighting forever wars. We don't. Yeah. And more to the point, neither do they. Yeah. They want NATO to
pay up, and do their job.
10 years from now, what does the global security apparatus look like? I don't know. Again,
and we can't. Europeans are very dependent on America for our security.
Too dependent. It's funny, isn't it? Because one thinks of a time not that long ago when the idea of a European army was sort of sacrilegious. But actually now you have a lot of intelligent people saying, well, we can't.
Makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And Germany, which has always shied away from a strong military kind of character for obvious historic reasons, huge pressure.
Well, Trump's right about that, in the sense that when he looks at NATO and says it's an organisation we are basically paying for, and the Europeans are just getting a lot of the benefit from.
You reserve the right to tell us you hate us.
Yeah, that's right.
When we spend more than you do, and then we go and sort out these issues, and if it lasts more than 3 weeks, you call us imperialists. I mean, it is although, when I hear the Republican debates, the presidential debates, and the kind of who can be the most isolationist, is alarming. It does get scary,
because that's in their DNA. If you go back to the founding fathers, that is in their
Washington's farewell address. We don't get entangled in, and you're right. It's a relatively recent idea, the Pax Americana, and I think it's in its old form. It's gone. So the question is, moving forward, what kind of role do we see for NATO, for America? Now, if Trump wins, the answer is practically zero. And that's scary.
Well, then that does bring the question right into the foreground, and there'll be a solution required, because can you imagine a world without a NATO in it right now?
John Bolton's memoirs are amazing. I mean, John Bolton, it's amazing Trump's capacity to make crazy people look sane. John Bolton was his national security advisor, and really demented and deranged, but he was like, wow, this guy is off the hook. And in his memoirs, there's a description of sort of being in a car, and Trump going, maybe today I'm going to leave NATO, and John Bolton saying, no, don't do that, Mr. President, and calling generals on his phone saying, please text him, I might do it today, I'm not sure, NATO, it's kind of, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing?
When I was growing up, you used to look back at 20th century history and think, how lucky am I to be alive now? In the best time there is to be alive.
Totally.
And now I'm slightly worried that we're just on the advent of possibly the worst time to be alive.
Yes, and we've both got kids, right? And that focuses the mind, doesn't it? It really does, because you think, one of the kind of natural human instincts is this impulse to leave a better place behind you, you know, a better future, a better prospect, a more peaceful world, all these banalities that actually are very meaningful.
I think maybe people will look back at our generation and the generation before and think we were the generations that absolutely blew it. You know, we had the opportunity to create a much better world, but we absolutely blew it.
I think that the tragedy of the 90s is the subject of a great book by a great historian, you know, which is we had this moment where we could have reshaped the world as people did after the Second World War.
Yeah.
We could have secured Russia with 100 Marshall Plans.
Yes.
And what we did was we said, here's this thing called democracy. Now, what's this about oligarchs and former KGB people taking all the money? All right, you'll be fine. We'll see in 10 years, you know.
It's fine.
And 10 years was Putin, and he's still around.
All right, well, that's been consistent doom and gloom. Is there anything to look forward to in the next 12 months? Apart from Liverpool possibly winning the
Liverpool,
title.
Obviously, a cause of endless joy. As one of my continuing education as a football fan. The Olympics?
Yes.
The Euros?
Yes.
The Euros, both can...
Lots of good sport,
Very good sport. I think it may just be sport, you know. I'm not sure that there's much else on the sort of hymn sheet to look forward to.
But you're right, the Olympics will
The Olympics is invariably, and I have a hunch the French will do a fantastic
I hope they do,
job, you know. I mean, Macron will not... I mean, he'll just move heaven and earth, won't he, for it to be like a... You know, grand projet.
It will be his Mitterrand moment. Yeah.
And good luck to him, because we need something like that. And the Olympics do... They have a... I mean, one of the interesting things I think about sport is that it's one of the last things that people trust.
Yeah.
You know, people actually do... One of the reasons that Gary Lineker is such an influential character is that, you know, people trust him a lot more than they do Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. And
not to stretch things too much, but it does come back full circle to your points about regularising trust within politics.
Yeah.
Well, the reason people trust sport is that there are very clear rules, you know.
Absolutely.
And they're very well scrutinised, you know, and people moan about...
And managers get sacked.
We need a VAR for politics, don't we?
Yes.
We need people to say, right, stop a minute. What's just happened? Who did what? That's not allowed, mate. You're now in a lot of trouble.
If Michel Mone was playing in the Prem, right, she'd be 50 yards offside and say to the ref, "Oh, it's just offside."
That's right. Yeah, I don't own this offside.
No, it's not my. You know, I don't see the problem.
It's not my ball.
What? By the way, just so listeners can know, where are we with Michel Mone?
So next week we're going to, in partnership with the Good Law Project, we're going to serve them notice that we're going to sue them to recover the money that we had to spend in our legal response to their empty defamation threats.
And they've been selling. We read that they've been selling.
There's been a
fire sale.
Apparently they're selling the yacht that they don't own. So that's, I don't know where that falls into law. But
Matt, she's just lying to the press. Okay.
Yeah. It's not a crime.
It's not a crime.
It's not a crime. No.
She's a member of the House of Lords. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that you got a member of the House of Lords saying it's not a crime to.
No, just a lie.
Just a lie.
Stuff, yeah. Well, I've been following closely Dan Needle, the tax lawyer, who's
great man,
who's been threatening for what sounds like some fairly serious evidence against Doug Barrowman.
Excellent.
You know, so there's a lot.
That's who's Mr. Mone.
Yeah, Mr. Mone, who's, you know, the whole premise of this sucks, and this kind of smokescreen that they're trying to put up about, well, we're not quite as bad as a lot of other people, you know, that doesn't really wash. But she's right in that sense that there is a bigger story.
This is a structural story.
Yeah.
But as I think we said on the end of 2023 episode, you know, she's not a scapegoat, she's a case study.
Yes,
and this idea that she is not a one thing one can be sure of at the beginning of 2024, Michel Mone is not a victim.
No. On that note, thank you so much for listening to our first podcast.
Thank you very much, and I hope you all, in spite of all the above, have you and your families have a great year.
Yes, a wonderful year ahead.
And you know, there's probably going to be a change of government in the UK, so it's not all doom and gloom.
So there are like Donald Tusk in Poland.
Donald Tusk in Poland,
like so you know, we can push back against these people.
No, I mean it's not nothing. Human agency.
Yeah.
This is why I hate the right side of history argument.
Yes.
Right, which is that the only thing that ever is human agency.
That's right.
People coming together and doing stuff. That's
right.
it. That's all there is. And none of what we've been discussing today is inevitable.
No.
The question is, are people prepared to step up to the plate at the various levels of politics and citizenship? And there's only one way to find out, as Harry Hill would say.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for listening. Get in any questions and feedback to our email address, which is 2matts, that's the number 2, MATTS, at tnepublishing.com. We look very much forward to hearing your questions for our regular Sunday morning Q&A show.
Q&A, yes.
Yeah, which we'll pick up this Sunday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And don't forget your subscription offer at theneweuropean.co.uk/2matts. That's the number 2, MATTS. You do something positive about the state of the media in this country.
That's something you can do in 2024.
Yeah, you can. Be proactive and support our journalism. If you like what you hear on this podcast, then subscribe to The New European. There's plenty of it in there every single week. Thank you, as ever, to our production team, Ollie at Rethink Audio. And until next week...
It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.